Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Droids Are Welcome Here, the fun, geeky Star Wars podcast where everyone, even those pesky little droids, are welcome. Today, we got something special for you. We're joined by our good friend Pete Fletzer, who has just finished writing his own novel, Who Owns the Myth? Star Wars, Fandom, and the Soul of the Saga. Pete, first of all, congratulations, because that is like a massive step.
Thank you.
Secondly, really good book. And thirdly, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And we have had the good fortune of getting to know you over the last couple of years, and it's always fun to talk Star Wars. So thank you so much for having me.
That's always a pleasure, my friend. And this time, like I said, we get to talk about something special. Normally, we're chatting about things that other people are writing, but today we get to talk about what you wrote. We get to talk about who owns the myth. How are you
Wow.
feeling? How are you feeling?
Uh,
Having, you've wrote a book. How do you feel?
it's equal parts, pride and relief. And, as as I was saying a little bit before, it's I now understand what Lucas meant when he said a movie is never finished, it just escapes, because that's kind of where I got to with the book. And I just kind of had to I got it to a point. I literally, after a week before we went to the final edits and stuff, it was it was a lot of fun. And I kind of always felt like I had something to say, I just wasn't sure what it was. So I'm just excited that it's out, and I'm excited to share it with everybody.
Well, honestly, it when you sent me the advanced copy, like I had a blast reading it. And then you went and made changes, so now I get to read it all over again and be like, oh,
You
this is
get
completely different. No, but where did this come from? Like I've seen a lot of podcasters that are writing books lately. I mean, what was the inspiration behind this? Why'd you decide one day, you know what, I'm gonna write a book?
Well, it's funny. Since I wanted to write a book, and I had no idea what it would be about. And a couple years ago, I started thinking, this podcast that I've been doing since 2019 really is giving me some sort of insight and something that I can write about. And my actually about 2 years ago, I started trying to put together some of the stories that I heard from the podcast, but I felt I was telling somebody else's story, and to me wasn't, that felt like hoarding more than writing a personal story. And then I was kind of struck by things. Number one, I felt like I have had such a unique front row seat to fandom since I seeing it in the theaters before it was called A New Hope, to writing for a couple Lucasfilm publications, to going to premieres, to hosting this podcast and doing really fun things and talking to interesting people. I always knew there was a book in there, but I'm not sure what it was. And so that from there, then I sort of said, okay, I think the fandom is a very interesting thing to look at, because I think, one of the things, I don't know about you, you tell people you're a Star Wars fan, sometimes depending who you're, they're like, oh, Star Wars fans. And it's either you're either a super nerd, or that is the most toxic group of people I've heard of. So I said,
Yeah.
there's something there. Second thing that I started thinking about was the question that I was asking myself, and that was, what happens when creator comes back to a story after they've left it for a number of years? And suddenly I realized that one of the reasons why the Star Wars fandom is passionate as they are, and where the disagreements and arguments come from, is they begin to own the story themselves. There's these other influences, and it started far back as George Lucas making changes to special editions, and as recent as all the Disney stuff. And every time a new story comes out, people who have owned Star Wars in their mind react one way or another, and it's just on whether they lash out or whether they can have conversation about it.
I think that's and I think a lot of people relate to that. Like you want to write something, but what do you want to write?
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think that you've got a unique perspective on it. Like you grew up with the original trilogy.
Hmm.
You grew up with the very early, Star Wars online scene. Even hosting one of the first Star Wars fan sites.
Yep.
And not only that, you've then, moved into doing podcasts and you've been talking with the people who are doing current work. So you've kind of got that unique perspective of every aspect of this journey, right from
Yeah.
start to where we are now.
Yeah. I always find it kind of amusing when, like, just today, I've because it's the internet. Somebody today told me, well, you like Star Wars or you like Disney, so Disney Star Wars, so that means that you aren't a real fan, and you probably just started liking it recently. And I was like, dude, dude,
It's
I've
been a
been,
couple of years.
yeah, I'm like Andor. I've been in this fight since I was 5 years old. So I it's though, and that's not even it's it's not a flex so much as it's just really interesting because it's exciting to watch take over the imaginations of next generations, right? Whether it's me, who, like I said, I was 7 years old when I saw it on the big screen in 1977. When you saw it, your generation, you took it on, and now even as much as like watching like my son become a Star Wars fan and why the way it's hit him, and so yeah, I mean the perspective is unique because I have had. I mean, there's a lot of luck involved in where I was, right time, right place, and so instead of, I think that's something I wanted to capture and wanted to share with people, and it's it definitely gives me a unique perspective, especially when things get weird online, and I don't like that stuff necessarily. I do find myself being involved in it, but only because I find that I'm passionate about it, and I think that that's one of the things that I try to explore in this book is where this comes from. Why do I care so much? Is kind of the first question, right? Like why, when I see somebody say, Disney ruined Star Wars, or George Lucas ruined it when he put in the Ewoks, or George Lucas ruined it with Jar Binks, or Disney, like why is that? And exploring that and trying to understand it kind of led me to this concept of it's because it is, not to overstate it, and this is not exactly what I mean, but it's very much like religious arguments, right? In that this is something that means so much to me, and there's a story behind it. That's how I really went back to the concept of it being a myth, and it's really the first modern media myth that is still growing in us every day, and it's going to change, and the mythic structure touches people ways that they don't even realize, and as such we become so defensive of the story, and it doesn't matter if the story improves or slides back a little bit, we're still connected to the story in a unique way, and you don't necessarily you're not sure how to, nobody's really sure how to react to it, and even people who love it aren't sure how to react to it, right? So there's so many different emotions that go into being a Star Wars fan that it's not as simple as just I wear a Star Wars t-shirt and I'm a big fan. So
Well, I mean, obviously, you just got that T-shirt like a year or two ago. You haven't
yeah,
been a fan at
for
all.
sure.
There was a note in the foreword that I'm glad you touched on that in the foreword, which was beautifully written. Also, um,
Yeah, Scott was great. I can't thank Scott Chernoff for doing that.
yeah, that was he did a really good job with that. But
He's an awesome guy too. So yeah,
he noted in the foreword like how you confront the toxicity without embracing it,
yeah.
and it's so easy. It's so easy to get dragged down into a slinging match where you're just going at each other, making it personal. And I don't think I really even looked at it from this perspective that it's from a place of loving the franchise and wanting the perfect version of it.
Right.
Does it get heated? Yes. Does it get like very, do people go too far? Absolutely. But there is something at the core of it that, it's born out of some kind of love of this stupid, dumb franchise.
But it's interesting because it really is there, and there's a fine line, and Scott did a great job of pointing it out in the forward. In no way is there ever an excuse to be a toxic, racist, misogynist jerk and hide behind Star Wars. That's a completely different book to
Yeah.
write about, right? However,
That's Who Owns the Myth Part 2.
right. That's right. That's who doesn't have to be a part of the myth. But the when sorry, when you start to take it apart and try to understand, so it's very interesting to me because I have a lot of friends of various generations and ages, and I still have very good friends who are my age, who still can't get past the prequels, and they still feel this and demonstrate this sort of um, almost revulsion toward it, and kind of like George ruined Star Wars at that point. And you know what? that's actually okay because they still love the concept, they still love the story, and when those movies came out, it hit them in such a way that it changed the way they imagined Star Wars to be. And I admitted, and I think I probably say it in the book as well. Like when the prequels first came out, it wasn't the Star Wars I expected or thought was mine or whatever. Um, but I eventually, I changed because I love the story, and I stuck with it, and I began to see the part it played. But it's kind of the same thing with the prequel people, because a lot of people are the sequel people. The people who don't like the sequels generally are people who, a lot of them came up through the prequels, which there's a chapter, and it might have been the one that I added, and so you might not have read it. Was
I'll
the
pretend I did.
yeah, you pretend you did. This concept that the people who had to fight to defend the prequels when they were kids, who had to say, "Look, Jar Jar Binks speaks to me. Jar Jar Binks, the look and feel of the prequels is Star Wars to me." Suddenly, have turned on people who say the sequels speak to me. The Rey, Kylo, Poe characters, they speak to me. And while they were busy defending their own stories, now something has switched in them to say, no, that's not my Star Wars. And it's like they completely forgot when the generation before them was saying Jar Jar and the Anakin love story is not my Star Wars. And but the reality is, when you can step back, and I think eventually we all get to that point, if Star Wars means that much to you, to be like, yeah, I didn't love that, but it's part of the story, and if I respect and love the story, that's fine. And the story isn't always going to go where your head thinks it's going to go, and if it did, honestly, I think you and I might have even talked about this with one of the Disney series. Like every week, whenever one of the Disney shows hits, one of the Disney era Star Wars shows hits, I think I know what's going to happen. Oh, this is the week where Boba Fett's going to blah blah blah, but it doesn't, and that's actually good, because if I could predict it all, that would mean that the story wasn't growing. It was repeating. It wasn't, which is one of the challenges with the sequels. With as great as the Force Awakens is, you can lay it right over A New Hope, and it's kind of a lot of the same stuff. And if it didn't grow from there with Ryan's story, it would have felt like, oh, we've reached the point where it's stale, and it's just kind of doing what it
Yeah,
does.
we're just gonna go into another empire, another return.
Right, right. But I think, maybe to get back to your point about one of the things that Scott said, is I think it's important to try to, at least make the effort to have an understanding of where that might be coming from. Because 9 out of 10 of the people who hate the prequels or hate the sequels, they're still Star Wars fans, and they're not beating up Star Wars. They're just like, it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You know what? And like we're doing this while the Blue Jays and the Dodgers are playing in the World Series, and I'm a huge Phillies fan. I hate the Dodgers, but I love baseball. So I'm just excited to watch great baseball and rooting for the Blue Jays all the way. But it's like piece of who we are, and you're not of all of it, and that's actually quite all right. We need to remember that.
I gotta get you and Jace on a stream sometime to talk about baseball, because you two both like literally are rooting for the exact same team here. Um, but I think one of the like, and I've said this a lot of times on like various podcasts over the years, but like, sure, not everything's gonna resonate with everyone, and that's okay. But there's
Yep.
always gonna be
Yep.
some inspiration you can find from it. And if you don't find that inspiration, you know what? Maybe your kid's gonna find that inspiration in it. Maybe your friend, maybe your neighbor, maybe somebody is gonna look at that and be like, you know what? I resonate with that. You know what? This makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's
And,
okay.
um, it's you bring up an awesome point. And honestly, like when the Clone Wars animated series first hit, I didn't watch it. Kind of that dark time of Star Wars. I didn't watch it. Oh, it's animation. It's not for me. And of course, it turned out I missed some of the great Star Wars stories told. But when I watched it as the entry point for my son, Star Wars, and watched it through that perspective, then I understood it, because his, his Han, Leia, and Luke were Rex, Cody, and Fives. It's fantastic, and it opened the door. And now he's interested in the rest of the galaxy as everything else. I came in through the original trilogy, and now I have this entire universe that I can and care about and engage with, and I, importantly, is meeting people like yourself and others, and we have this shared love. And I'm sure Star Wars stuff that you love that I'd be like, oh man, I can't watch that. And there's probably stuff that I like that you're probably like, that's a choice, and so, and that's okay, and that's totally fine. And but again, we've entered the door into this universe, into this myth, and again, that's kind of the underlying story. The whole thing is because it's written, it's a modern myth, and myth to sort of the core essence of what it be human, and it puts the basics of versus evil and the way things work in our worlds onto fantastic sort of characters and creatures. And so I think that's why it resonates with people. And again, if I believe that, Luke Skywalker should do and he doesn't on screen, a shock to my system, right? And so and it's just a matter of how you handle it. And the internet allows people to handle things very poorly. But I think if you conversations that we have online, and if you look at the that you have offline, again, conversations I have with family who don't understand the sequels, don't like sequels, don't like whatever the prequels, fine, because we have a conversation about it. It's not, well, you're not a because you don't get it. So
Oh, you liked Who Owns the Myth? You're not a real fan.
yeah, yeah, I'm probably here
The
some
and the
point,
other
right?
interesting thing that like the forward had touched on was like how, Star Wars has expanded so much in the last like what 40, 50, plus years. And it
Hmm.
very like all it would have taken was that one movie not taken off and we wouldn't have all this, you know? Like what would have happened
Yeah,
if A New Hope back then had just been one of those summer flops that runs for a weekend, gets no viewers, and just disappears? Wouldn't have any of it.
yeah, and it's so wild that it happened. And for years been sort of studying the Joseph Campbell perspective, and I know in some ways that's sort of overdone. There's a lot of people aren't familiar with it, but once you realize that the reasons Star Wars probably worked, there's no scientific evidence, but to me, one of the reasons that Star Wars worked in 1977 was for a number of reasons. Number one, the world needed a fun, right? They needed to get back to action, adventure, romance. You were looking at movies like Taxi and The Exorcist and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So movies were very heavy and very excellent movies, fantastic movies. Going to the cinema was not, you know, the fun sort of carnival ride that it could have been. And so I think that hook. But the thing about Star Wars that when you think about it is knew who the bad guy was, you knew who hero was, um you knew everybody's role without having to overtly tell you, because they all fit into these things that have been told in every story thousands of years. You knew and you knew that there was darkness, and you knew that there was light, and you knew all these things spoke to you uh, at a visceral level without anybody having to over explain it. And that's one of the things that I say is that, George Lucas set out to make a myth with giving a lesson on it. And I think that's why, of course, to your point, it could have in the 40 theaters that it hit and didn't where, and that would have been it. And wouldn't have been written, and you and I probably wouldn't have spoken to each other unless, who knows what would have come after.
It'd be Star Trek. We'd
The
just be watching Star Trek.
but the word it was there was so that's one of the things I love about Star Wars is there were so many about it that should not have worked. I mean, there's a quote, I wish I could find it because I can't, and I know I read it. Ralph McQuarrie told George, he was like, things look good, but there's no way these are going to look any screen. And they did, right? Stormtrooper worked, and they shouldn't have, right? Darth Vader worked, and maybe he shouldn't have. The rubber masks and Tina brought us into that world in a way that, if right time, right place.
It's everything just all these little pieces just meshed together just right to hit that sweet spot.
Yep, yep, and enough vision from George to know what he felt was important, like the music, even without that John Williams score, without the sound effects from her, with everything, just one of those magic moments.
So I'm gonna backtrack a little bit here. I'm looking at that copy on your shelf there, and I gotta bring up that cover design. That is a really nice cover design. I think it really just you want to know the vibe that I get looking at it. It's
Yeah.
growing up reading, like a mystery book, like a Hardy Boys or something like that. It's like
Hmm.
it's like you're diving into that mystery of it. I
Ah,
don't know how you did it, but you kind of captured that almost childhood feeling of just like it's like a mystery to be unraveled.
yeah.
Who
Oh, that's
owns the
cool.
myth?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I'm glad you like it. It's funny because the original cover was the two lightsabers clashing, and I showed it to a friend of mine, and they were like, "That's a great cover, but Disney is probably you can't do that." And I was like, "Yeah, but you can't see the hilts. It's just two colored lines. We know it's a lightsaber. You have the word Star Wars on the cover. You get in trouble." So I was stuck. I didn't go with it, and actually, so the concept for the cover, I was literally texting with both my dad, who he's been my editor, he's been my fan, he checks out the podcast every week, and Nick Milky, my co-host on Around the Galaxy Live, and I was like, I just don't know where to go with this. I was like, do I show people, and somewhere between the two of them they came up with the concept, and then it was great because I had already had um the book was broken up into three episodes, not surprisingly. The first sort of
I
how
wonder where that came
the
from.
what a great idea, who thought of that.
Damn, they should use that in a
The
movie or something.
the first being sort of the building of the myth, so people sort of retrace the step where we've been, and then the battle over the myth. The battle for the myth was the second one, and the third one is sort of what the future looks like. So, with the concept of sort of for building the myth, there's with the typewriter, and then the sort of second um, section is guys in ties. I think that's one of the things that has led to some of the Star Wars challenges is ownership, like it or not, and it changed the way the story is delivered. As soon as it became more just George's story and became a marketing, it changed. And then, of course, the last is two kids using flashlight play lightsabers with, and because I think that that's honestly where Star Wars lives is in that imagination of kids. Sort of that's sort of the what the future of Star Wars. We're Star Wars will still be in 100 years, and I don't know what that form will look like. Will be our children's children who are discovering it and be reading it like it's Homer in the Odyssey, or some old Sherlock Holmes or Wizard of Oz, but it's still going to be there, and that's what keeps it going. And I think that that's why it survives, because we can still love it as adults, but it's not interesting to kids. It's dead. If
Yeah,
stop getting into Star Wars, then we'll have reached its end. And I think people need to remember that when they're like, this isn't my Star Wars. You're right. It's not your Star Wars anymore. It's this next generation.
yeah.
Skeleton Crew, I wish got more exposure, because that was, to me, best sort of hand holding into the next generation.
I really need to see like a second season of that because like I was like engrossed with every episode.
It was so fun. I mean, it was literally, I wasn't watching it to try to find Easter egg. I wasn't watching it to try to, connect it to. I was just like, this is fun. This is happening in that
It's
Star
literally the
Wars world,
Goonies in
and it's
space.
right. It's just pure fun,
I mean, literally, the first
fun.
thing you
So,
see is two kids playing fake lightsabers. Which I mean, let's be honest here. If I'm walking through a forest and I see a cool stick, I'm gonna pick it up and be like,
I
come
still
on,
do
who
it,
doesn't
right?
still do that? We still do that.
I still walk to the supermarket and hold my hand up and
Me going into
opening the
work
door with
every
the
day. It's
force.
like, you know what? I got this. Um, So one of the really cool stories that you brought up in this was about like the early, the AOL days, and I
Uh
realized I just absolutely aged myself. Because I feel like half the viewers are going to be like, "The hell was that?"
what does
But like
AOL
the
stand for?
early days
Yeah.
of the internet, when everything was dial up,
Yep.
if someone had to use the phone, you have to disconnect off the internet. God
Right. I
forbid
got to
you're in
make
an online game like StarCraft, you're done. Um,
exactly.
but like
Yep.
that's how you got started. You had one of the earliest Star Wars fan sites,
Yeah.
and I got a good chuckle out of how you met Steve Sansweet.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite stories too because website this I called it base and it was I literally I learned because the job that I had at the time we were just to create websites at sales job and we need to build a website blah 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 so I was teaching myself how to do it and I was like I love Star Wars and also at the same time I was working with my dad and some of his created a board game a trivia game called the Amazing Science and Horror Trivia Game and so I wrote all the questions and by the way one day I'll send some copies of the questions because they're hilarious. They're from 1990 whatever. So it was before anything. So like our toughest question was like, was Luke's call sign in the Death Star trench run? And I was like, come on, that's your hardest question. But also doing a lot of writing for newsletters and a couple other fanzines around the country. And with my website, I figured I could, sort of promote writing because that's what a website was. It was graphics and writing. And we got to a point where, since it was essentially, I'm pretty, if not the first, one of the first websites, and the traffic was going so well. At the same time, Steve Sansweet was out there doing um, at Star Trek conventions. He was showing, doing a show about the special editions coming out, and everybody wanted to see that because that was the only place you could see it. That and Star Wars Galaxy magazine were the only places could find images from the upcoming edition. So I started getting emails from people left and right saying, "Hey, when is where's Steve going to be next? I live in Oklahoma. Is he going to be hitting me in Oklahoma?" So I made this decision. I'm going to call Lucasfilm. I'm a huge Steve Sweet fan. I literally have all his books, and I had them at this point, like literally across the office from me where I was working. And so I decided, I'm just going to call Lucasfilm, and I'm just going to see if they can just send me a schedule, and I'll post it up on the website. So as the story goes in the book, I call Lucasfilm, and it was back when they had an actual receptionist answering the phone, and I said, "Hey, I have a website. I'd like to see if I can get Steve Sansweet's schedule for for his tour for the special editions." And she says, "Okay, please hold." All right, they're probably going to come back and say we don't have it, or
Sorry, we
give
can't
us an
help
address
you.
and we'll mail it to you, or yeah, we can't help you. And I'm waiting there, waiting there, and waiting there. And the part that I don't put in the book is I was literally like laying on the floor on the phone, like you do, uh, um, and then I hear Steve Sweet speaking, and I was like, "Holy shit!" I and I was like, "Oh my god!" They put me straight through to the guy, and again, because he was also doing, I don't know, this will date me, of course. I mean, I'm already dated. I've been watching Star Wars for 50 years, but he used to be the on the Home Shopping Network. I guess it was they used to do, or QVC. They had like these Star Wars sales and things, so he used to do those as well. So I've seen him, I've read him, and I knew who he was. And then I was on the phone, and he was responsible for fan relations for Lucasfilm at the time. They didn't have their website yet, so he was asking me questions about my website, and I was asking him questions about where he's going to be. And I guess through talking about why I did website, I was like, yeah, I'm a freelance writer. I'd love to do. And he's like, oh my gosh, I have more work than I can possibly keep up with right now. Would you be interested in taking an assignment or two? And I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, good. Send me your some samples, and I'll take a look. So had to use FedEx. Probably cost me like $35 to overnight it to California. And next thing you know, I'm writing for I'm signing NDAs with Topps, who is the publisher, and just doing these sort of things. And then every time he was on the East Coast, I would go and hang out with him and just check in with him and see how he was doing. And he also, when I was in California once for my day job, he gave me a tour of the Skywalker Ranch, which was just
Oh,
incredible.
that's
And so
awesome.
it was wild. Like in the book, I'll never forget because I really was hoping I'd get a chance to go into Skywalker Sound because I've always been a sound guy and an effects guy. It's like I can't take you there because James Cameron is in there finishing this movie, and I realized a couple weeks later or a couple months later when Titanic hit that, oh my god, that's what he was doing in there. He was doing Titanic when I was like outside the door, so it was very cool. But yeah, meeting Stan Sweet, and again, he's always been supportive of me, from the podcast to thing I've done. He's been super supportive. So, and he's one of the best people in fandom, bar none.
I gotta get him on sometime. I don't think I've ever actually talked to him, but like through you and others, like, I've heard so many nice things about him.
Oh yeah, yeah, yep. And he's really just a truly wonderful human being.
So like one thing that, and I never really looked at it in this way, but you brought up like the hero's journey, all these
Mm-hmm,
characters having these different roles that through history, we've seen in other tales, right back to, as you were saying, Homer and all that.
mm-hmm,
But I never really looked at it in terms of like, oh, that's where he's getting his inspiration. That's where he's going with the traditional hero's journey. You've
yeah.
got the young hero, you've got the rogue, you've got, the villain. And I never really looked at it through that lens until I read this. And it's like, oh, it was literally right there, and I just didn't quite look at it like that.
That's really cool that I was able to help you find that because I think that's really interesting. I do have there's one graphic in the book in the chapter headers where it is the hero journey, and it's I mean, if you look at hero's journey as Campbell had defined it, the monomyth, it's literally every step of the way. I mean, from uh, the sort of plain, sort of young, innocent person who's called gets a call to adventure and initially said, "Nah, this isn't for me." And of course, that's the I can't leave the farm. My aunt and uncle need me. I can't possibly go do anything. And then something happens to make them have to heed that call, and then there's the crossroads, which is the cantina, and then there's things like the dark fortress where you go and you prove your worth. And there's if you look at the steps of the journey, Lucas literally mapped it on there. And what's amazing about it is when you look at the two trilogies that George did, and you can also apply this to the sequels, I think, in many ways. You can see that not only was he able to do it on one movie, but then when he went to the trilogy, he was able to keep that sort of cycle going. And then when he went to the six movies, starting with Anakin, it's like circles within circles of different heroes' journeys. And and to your point, these are stories that have been around forever. You even look at something like The Wizard of Oz, which it's almost more overt. I mean, literally like a change of color in the film from when she steps over the threshold, as Campbell called it, into the unknown. And it's those are the stories that last. Wizard of Oz is still with us, and the Iliad and the Ramayana and all these stories are still with us. And if you look at them, you take them apart, they fit those sort of models.
I love that. I love that. And any excuse for me to literally go back and watch Star Wars again, I'm never gonna say no to that. And it appears that in between our last break, this has gotten out of hand, and now there is two of them. I have somehow cloned Pete Fletzer. Think of the productivity here.
That next book will be out in no time.
We're getting part two and part three. You can both write one. So another part of the book that personally just it brought up like a childhood memory was the Sandpile Galaxy. I think
Yeah.
I've got so many fond memories of like as a kid playing with like Hot Wheels cars in the sandbox, making up all of these crazy stories. I think that's just like a core memory for like everyone. We've all done that.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I literally, for some reason, thought. I mean, I knew everybody had Star Wars action figures and all of that stuff, and but so many people who've read the advanced copies have commented on that particular section, which makes me feel great because yeah, I mean that's when I think of Star Wars as a kid, I think of that moment of playing, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just making up our own Star Wars stories with the action figures. And on the one hand, I'm like, oh man, if I still had those, what would they be worth? But on the other hand, the value I got out of playing with them and making memories is we can't put a price on that.
Yeah. It literally made you the fan you are today, and
Exactly.
probably spawned more than a few headcanons.
For sure. 100%. Yep. Yep.
So the one thing that definitely it was obviously before my time, but like when the first movie came out, like we said earlier, like it could have flopped, we could have had none of this, but instead the opposite happened. It exploded overnight.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about it. People were literally going to the movie like 30, 40 times just to get that perfect costume right,
Yeah.
crafting their own stories of what comes next. Just really that was just an overnight sensation. So like what was that like, being a part of that?
Yeah.
Oh, we
Well,
lost you. We lost Pete number two. Sorry, there's
it's
only
all
one of
right.
you now.
That's probably better. Um, yeah, it was interesting because it really was like it's such a weird world to think about now. And it's something when I look at my kids, I think, they'll never know it. And it's actually not just my kids. It's not that it's been a while where you've had VHS and cable and all that stuff to be able to see that. But literally there were only two ways for me to get back into Star Wars on a regular basis. One was to go to the movie, and it ran in the theaters. This was a factoid that I forgot to put in my book. I think it was in theaters for 48 weeks, which, now it's in theaters for 3 weeks and then it's
Yeah.
on,
It's unheard of to be
digital.
any longer than that.
Right. And then the other way was listening to the music of it. And here's actually one thing I have it nearby, the Story of Star Wars album,
Ooh.
which,
Oh, that's beautiful.
which is just, it's why I think I have most of the movie memorized because I literally would just listen to it over and over and over and over and over again. Um, and so, yeah, so it was, I think back then, and maybe this is why there's a different perspective on the story is it had to live a lot in your mind because you couldn't just pop on Disney Plus or throw the VHS in or whatever. You had to find ways to engage. And I think that's why action figures were so important. I talked about this with Anthony Bresnikan years ago in one of my early podcasts. We talked about how Star Wars came to life when we took the action figures from the characters that didn't have names before they were Ponda Baba and Dr. Avizi, and they were Walrus Man, and they were they just had these very, but we made stories around them and we imagined what was going on there. And then the same thing again with watching Star Wars. So I didn't actually see it until Labor Day weekend because that was the first time my dad was able to get me there to see it. Um, but all my friends had seen it, and by the time I saw it, I think I knew a lot about it already, of course. But experiencing it was amazing. And then I think it was just perfect timing because when I saw it, then it was just coming up to Christmas, and so it was every opportunity. When it came to our local movie theater, I went there a couple times. I don't know how many times I saw it in the theater. I'm sure it wasn't 30 or 40, but I'm sure it was 10 to 15 at least. And but it was interesting too because it really was anything that came on television that had Star Wars. I remember my dad, like, he'd call me, "Hey Pete, they're on 60 Minutes tonight or on the news tonight. They're going to do a story on Star Wars," and I would just run in, and
Go
just to
record
be
that
able to.
VHS.
Right. Well, it was before VHS. And so it was just like I had to see, oh my God, that's a stormtrooper. And, just all these. So it lived in my mind more than anywhere else. And I think that was the way for everybody. Everybody who was a fan. I mean, the Donnie and Marie show did a thing with like dancing stormtroopers, and Chris Christopherson was Han Solo, and it's awful, but you just see. I mean, this is why the holiday special actually holds a special place in the hearts and minds of Generation Xers because that was a Star Wars movie that was on TV, and it was just it was before Star Wars came on TV.
Yeah.
So it was but to answer your question directly, it really literally was every t-shirt, every store, every magazine cover was all Star Wars all the time. And honestly, I think we haven't seen anything like that until Grogu came. And I think Grogu was the closest thing, if you want to kind of connect to that time. I think Baby Yoda was the closest thing to that because you walk into a Walmart and you see rows of Grogu t-shirts. You
You know
go
exactly what it
to,
is.
yeah, and people who've never even watched The Mandalorian know what it is, what he is, and so I think it was, imagine that, except at a time when you couldn't just go home and then watch it. It was an event, right? To see Star Wars now. You were saying before, I'm going to go back and watch it, and yeah, you just I'll walk out of this room and I can just go flip it on. Whereas then it was like, Dad, can you take me to see it again this weekend with Mike and Matt? We're going to go see it, and please drive us. And he was probably like, I've spent more money on movie tickets than anything else. So, but yeah, I mean, it was an event, and I think one of the things like that I talk about in the book is that the world was ready for this kind of thing. Like the world was dark at that time, not as dark as today, but I mean, between like Watergate and post Vietnam and just like,
You needed that moment of levity.
yeah, you needed something that was just fun. And, I've been seeing people talk about that with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie coming out, right? I think a lot of people are like, there's so many pre-criticisms of it, but if it does what it's supposed to do, and I believe it will, it's just going to be fun. And that's what we need. We need Star Wars to be fun. And knowing Filoni and knowing Favreau, it's going to have all the deeper stuff. And when you watch it the second or third time, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I see what's going
Yeah.
on. But I really hope the first time I see it, I walk out and I'm just like, man, that was a fun movie. That's all I want. It's all I want for that. And that's what will capture that next generation. And I do worry a little bit that, because of the way stories are told now, and because, I was talking to somebody about music the other day too. Like people don't ingest music the way they used to. I sound like the old guy. The way that when I was a boy, we used to have to walk
Back
up
when
and
I
down the
was a
hill.
kid.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, people are used to series now. They're used to on demand. So it's a Star Wars film is very few movies are events. I mean, I think the last event movie we had was probably like one of the last two Avengers movies, right? And
Probably, yeah, it probably was, honestly. Like, I can't think of
yeah,
anything that's really captured it since then. Not on that scale, anyways.
right. That people were like excited, like, taking days off of work to go see and that sort of thing. And I don't know if we'll ever get there again. And so I think that's why it's important that it's actually owned by Disney right now, because Disney will keep it alive because it's makes money, let's be
Yeah,
honest. But
it's never not going
it'll
to make money.
correct. And it's going to, but it's they have an understanding of how to tell the story. So like for video games, that's the way a lot of um, you know, people under 20 get their stories now. It's through video games. So yeah, let's get more Cal Kestis. Let's get more of that kind of story and tell it that way. So as long as the story is still alive and as long as people are still interested in it and the next generation is pulling into it, it will continue to grow.
I'm glad you brought up the soundtracks. So, you'll get a kick out of this one. So I am last week and this week I'm volunteering at a local Halloween haunt.
Cool.
I do Pennywise every year.
Oh, nice.
This last weekend, someone decided that it was a good idea to give me a Bluetooth speaker for my tunnel so I could ostensibly play some, creepy music, a bit of piano, something off key.
Right.
And of course, in the prep behind and everything, all you hear coming to my tunnel is the Imperial March and the Cantina song.
Right.
And this, I poke my head out into the volunteer area, and I just see someone look back at me and just grin. I'm like, yeah, this guy gets it. This guy gets it.
And isn't it funny how like Star Wars music is again, people who've never seen the movie know the Cantina theme, they know the Star Wars theme, they know Darth Vader's theme, and that's pretty amazing. And I think that was when I knew that the prequels were going to be as special as we thought they would, because the Duel of the Fates was, it was like number 8 for 8 weeks or something like that or 8 days on Total Request Live, which was the video request show on MTV. And the fact that like Star Wars once again came, because there was this John Williams score was in the top 40 in the 70s.
You
And
just
it
don't
was
see that
back.
nowadays.
No, you don't see that. I mean, the only time you'll get, like, if there's a song from a movie by a major artist, it'll get in there. But movie soundtrack in like attracting people, and again, if you hear Duel of the Fates, it's Star Wars, and so yeah, just and I think again that's that weird and interesting thing about Star Wars is it makes this deep cultural impact that that people are willing to fight over, and because they love it. And again, what's interesting too is the prequel fans, the people not fans, the people who grew up with the prequels, they like, to them, Duel of the Fates, the Cross the Stars, and some of those Star Wars moments in music, like they're as ingrained in their head as Ben's death and the TIE fighter attack are for me in from Star Wars. So that's amazing. That's really amazing, and it's because they loved it so much. And and I keep going back to it. I think it's just this complete and utter love for what it is. And again, it's not even watching the movies every day. It's loving what it means and what it told you and how it hit you. And every Star Wars story, every Star Wars memory is probably more profound to an individual than the movie itself. Like, you remember seeing the movies. I was telling somebody the other day, I could tell you who and when I saw all 11 in the theater movies, who I was with, what our reaction was, what we talked about afterwards, because that was what it was. It's a core memory. And so when somebody tells you that, well, the prequels are invalid or the sequels are invalid, they're telling you your core memory is invalid. And that's where the personal attacks start. And then, of course, there's a number of people who just get ridiculous about it, but that's a whole
Yeah.
other story. But I
We
think,
we've both experienced those ones.
oh yes, we have. Yes, veterans of the fandom wars right here.
We survived the Clone Wars many years ago. Quite literally,
Yeah,
you had a second Pete in here, so you literally did have a
that's right.
clone.
I had a clone, and yeah.
It's gonna be P-E-E-G-E Fletzer. So there was I have a distinct memory of like when I picked up my copy of Heir to the Empire. I have a distinct memory of
Oh
walking
yeah.
into that used bookstore of that old book smell in the air. It was just this kind of little mom and pop, and I distinctly remember exactly where it was on the shelf. It's still got the sticker on it, even though that store doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, it's like it's that part of it that just stays with you. That
Yeah.
magic of it.
Yep. Yep. And if somebody was to tell you that Heir to the Empire doesn't count, it's not canon.
Well, that's fighting words.
Right, exactly. And of course it would be a different conversation in person, but yeah, it's technically it's not canon now, but it doesn't matter because it
Yeah.
was an entry to Star Wars for you. It was a Star Wars memory for you. And that's why the whole canon stuff gets so ridiculous to me. Is it doesn't matter if it's canon or not. Is Do you love it? Is it part of the Star Wars universe? Awesome. Do you not like the Disney stuff? That's okay. That's great because you still have your stuff. and
See,
and that's
it's interesting in that like since I left Wikipedia, like I've kind of changed the way I look at Star Wars in that like okay, it doesn't matter if this minor little thing doesn't line up exactly with the date of this other thing. You know what? It's all Star Wars. It's supposed to be
right.
fun. It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
master level thesis here. It doesn't have to, have every single thing lined up down to the day. Like it's just fun. That's all it
Yeah.
is.
Well, and that's the thing too, is
Liberating
that,
kind of.
well, I mean, if you think about the great myths, right? There's not one telling of all the different great stories of all time, right? I mean, even like, again, Wizard of Oz, the book is different from the movie. There's 100 different versions of like Achilles' story and that sort of thing. So, um, and if you, I was saying this to Ryan Airy on Screen Crush. I was saying that the one thing that I'm worried about with excuse me, James Gunn's DC universe is that he's going to be so worried about continuity. Whereas what DC has done really, really well, because their characters are mythic and they're very archetypal, right? You have Superman, you have Batman, you have the Joker, and we've had 100 versions of every one of them, and they can all live in that same universe. So I dare say Kiadi Mundi, right? Because we all know where that
Oh
came
yeah,
from, but
whoa, whoa. Screws and bolts,
yeah,
screws and bolts.
sorry, yes. So, um, it doesn't matter what his birthday was; it was his character, right? And it was that archetype of the character. And you know what? You need to learn to live in a world where a fake universe is not going to have all the things line up. It's if it works as a story that continues to build the myth. And so, um, yeah, I think there's a lot to be, and again, because it has now become mythical, it's bigger than a 6 movie do double trilogy. It's become so much bigger. There's so much around it. It's going to have, in order to keep the story alive and vital, it needs to be able to not get so stuck in
Yeah.
its, well, this is, it has to be that lightsaber hilt has to be 6.2 inches. If it's
Yep.
longer than 6 point, it's no,
And it needs to line up with
it's
this exact comic panel that was made 17 years ago.
correct. Yep. You can't live that way. Otherwise the story, and again, it will get boring because it's not history. It's myth. So
It's kind of, yeah, and that's interesting. Like I've honestly kind of recaptured a little bit of that magic looking at it through that lens of like, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to match this
right.
exact same comic. It's all different variations of the same universe. It's all different recollections of the same universe. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's fun.
Yes. Yep.
The one thing that I thought was really neat, you kind of touched on near the end of the book, um, and I'm going to use your exact quote here. This is referencing your kid.
Uh,
Someday they'll have their own Star Wars, not the one I grew up with, but their own chapter of the myth. And I kind of actually got a little bit of chill from that. It's just like
hmm,
it's so true and yet so powerful that, as you said, the Star Wars you grew up with is not the same Star Wars they grew up with.
right.
Their, I am your father moment was a completely different one, but it was
Yep.
just as powerful.
Yep. And I think in order for that to continue to happen, you have to be comfortable with characters like Kylo Ren and Rey Skywalker and Poe Dameron and Finn because they represent the world of those that was the movie going or the entry point for Star Wars at that time, right? I mean, it's if my son didn't see something that he could associate with, if my daughter didn't see Ray and instantly go create her own Ray costume when she was 7 years old or whatever it was when she saw it, if she didn't connect, then she's out. And I think as the elder statesman of Star Wars and Jordan, you're going to get there one day. You're going to be like, there's going to be that next generation. Your kids one day will be like,
Someday, not today.
someday, yes, not today, no, but someday. But you'll definitely be in. You're going to look at it differently, and there are times when I look at it, I'm like, this really isn't for me. And when you come to that realization that what's coming out now is speaking to the latest generation, and you realize that that's what's keeping your favorite story alive, then that's totally fine because it's all connected back to whatever part of Star Wars you love. Whatever comes out tomorrow is going to be connected, and it may not be something that speaks to you, but it's speaking to somebody. And as a result, Star Wars is not going anywhere.
What's your take then? What do you think? We're going to speculate here. 100
Yeah.
years from now, what is
Hmm.
Star Wars going to be?
I think it's going
Assuming,
to,
the Earth is still here and, all
right,
that.
assuming we haven't
Assuming we haven't,
annihilated ourselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's your take?
Um,
What's it going to be like 100 years from now?
I think it's going to be studied as one of the great myths. I think it will, and again because of the things that cause its biggest fan challenges, it will be studied because it's representing different things about the world at the time. I mean, just like when you read about old Roman mythology, and you can't read it, you can't be taught Roman mythology in school without learning about what was happening in the Roman Empire at the time, right? So 100 years, 200 years from now, when they look back at Star Wars and tell those stories, you're also going to be learning about the things that were happening around it. And I think it'll be a story that we study as a great all-time story because again, it hits all the archetypes of the myth. Um, but I also somehow feel like it's still going to be growing then. It won't be owned by Disney. It might not be owned by anybody. It might be just a public domain sort of thing that, you and I could go write another story about, you and I could go both write a Sherlock Holmes story tomorrow. And it would be just as valid as anybody else's because there's not a continuity or something that needs to be followed. And I think if it continues to speak to people, and like I said before, the next generation needs to pick it up, and my kids need to be able to pick it up, and and even if it does sort of start to fizzle out, I do believe because of the way it speaks to who we are now, and have been and will become, I think it will certainly be studied as one of the great stories ever told.
I think that's spot on. I think that is spot on. And presuming I'm around in 100 years, yeah, I'll go in on that.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know how it goes because
I'm
I
just
probably
trusting
won't be.
that I'm trusting that we're gonna figure out immortality at some point. I'm kind of banking on that. Um, I'm just gonna bank on that, and just assume everything's gonna be just fine. We're all
Yeah.
fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. So I think the real takeaway here: who owns the myth? What's your thought then? After all of the work you put into this book, who owns it?
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that I worked on just before I submitted the final version was I rewrote some of the epilogue because I wanted to try to address that question. Because I mean, how can you have a book that asks a question and doesn't give an answer? Um, but I actually think I think it's owned by anybody who's ever carried it in their hearts and heads. And so, I, as much as we may not get along with certain sections of the fandom, they own it as much as we do because it means something to them. Um, and I think it's owned by people who just um, who it speaks to, and it's something that they are excited every time they think about it and are willing to continue to keep it going. So I think the reality is it's not really owned by anyone, but at the same time it's owned by everyone who loves it.
I like that. I think that's a very good takeaway, my friend.
Cool. Excellent.
So, first of all, when is this book coming out?
So yeah, good question. November 11th is when the book will be available on Amazon. It'll be out in hardcover in November and softcover in December, and it will also be on Kindle on November 11th. But you can pre-order it now, both the hard copy and the soft copy, from whoownsthemyth.com. And there's a couple different ways you can get it. You can either get the signed copy, or you can get there's like we have different swag sort of packages because
I
it's
mean, who doesn't love swag?
2025. You need
Everyone loves some
swag.
swag.
Yeah, so you can order either the hardcover or the softcover, get signed copies at whoownsthemyth.com. And again, on November 11th, it'll be sitting in your Amazon store ready to go. So,
I highly encourage everyone to pick this book up. I know it sounds like I'm just hyping up my friend, but it was a genuinely good read. It really captures that childhood myth behind it. What drew you to Star Wars in the first place? The playing in the sandbox, the playing with lightsabers that were sticks. It's the core of what this franchise is the passion and joy we get out of it. That's what it is at its core.
that's great. I'm glad that's what you. And again, I was very careful not to make it an academic read. I think you can get some insight, like you said, you picked up some of the Joseph Campbell stuff that you might not have thought about before. That's great. It's observational. It's written in such a way that I wrote it like I write my podcasts. So very conversational and a quick read, actually. So
Well, I definitely recommend it. This is a solid reminder. I still got to order a copy of that. Unless you got any more of those physical ARCs available,
I,
I'm not
I I
gonna.
will
I'm not
I
gonna.
hey send me an address after we get off here and I'll mail you up one.
Much appreciated. I am very
Nope.
broke right now.
No, hey, I'm very happy to do it. Very
No,
happy to do
but
it.
you've done a genuinely good job with this book, Pete. Like, I'm not just puffing you up. Like you did a good job with this, man. I'm proud of you for this one.
Thank you very much. That means a lot coming from you. Seriously, it really does. So
And
thank
you're
you
not
so
the second
much.
podcaster who's written a book. 'Cause the other one, what was it? Scotty did his midi-chlorian one.
Yes, Scotty did his yep.
All right, let's make this just a recurring thing. Is each podcaster has to write a book.
Right, you're
This is
next. So what do you got?
I I got a pile of assorted notes, a
Okay.
pile of more assorted notes, and more notes because I have an unhealthy obsession with paper notes and then never actually doing them.
No, that's
So this book could be available in 2075. We'll get there eventually.
We'll be
Much
there.
procrastinating later. So, where can people find you, Pete? We know where you can find the book, but where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at ATGcast, or you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the SSW Network. Yes, I said TikTok. I'm not proud of it, but it's there. And our
I
YouTube
mean,
channel.
you have to.
Yes, you
This is
can
how it is.
check. You can check out our live show on Thursdays on youtube.com/ at the SSW Network. And just, yeah, look up Pete Fletzer or Around the Galaxy, and you'll find us there.
All right, I love it. I love it. What time do you go live at? It's what, 8 p.m.?
8 Central, 9 Eastern on Thursdays, and it's become sort of a at least every other Thursday, if not every Thursday, kind of thing. And we have some really cool guests coming up too, so it'll be
One of
fun.
these Thursdays, I'm actually gonna like not have a nap after work, and I'll actually pop in and be like, "What's up, guys?" Instead of coming
Yes,
at the
we
tail end and be like, "Yeah, I just woke up."
well, we need to have you on sometime for sure.
Let's do it, man. All right, Pete. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh,
Always a
thank
pleasure,
you.
my friend.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for giving me the chance to talk about this thing.
Always a pleasure, my friend. We'll have to do another one of these once the book comes out, and people either absolutely love it or you get crucified. I
Right.
hope it's the former.
I do too.
Listen, you haven't mentioned, screws and bolts, so you're probably fine. You did
Right.
just
Yeah,
mention Kiadimundi's birthday though, so I'm
I
this
know.
could go either way
This
here.
could this could fall apart at any
I
moment.
know. And there's Jay saying, "Oh no," because she heard me say Kiadimundi's birthday, and she knows what that means.
Yes.
All right, Pete.
Invasion.
Always a pleasure, my friend. You take care.
Thanks, you too.